Most men believe that regret works like a form of cosmic karma, that if you are a good enough man, she will eventually wake up one day and feel the crushing weight of your absence. This belief is not only misleading, it is psychologically incorrect. When a woman takes a man for granted, she usually feels absolutely nothing when the relationship ends. No panic, no immediate sense of loss, and certainly no emotional collapse. What she feels instead is a profound sense of relief and a desire for distance. This isn't because you didn't matter, and it isn't because the time you spent together was meaningless. It's because the human brain is incapable of feeling regret as long as access still feels available. And most men, out of a desperate need to be understood, make sure that access remains wide open. They reach out, they explain their side, they try to be seen one last time, hoping that their words will trigger a realization in her. What they don't understand is that regret is never triggered by effort or explanations. Regret is triggered by contrast, by the cold reality of absence, and by life unfolding in a way that is fundamentally different from what was expected. If you don't grasp this core psychological truth, you will continue to punish yourself for her indifference, and you will stay trapped in a cycle of trying to prove your value to someone who has already learned to treat your presence as a guaranteed background noise. To be taken for granted is not always about obvious disrespect or cruelty. In fact, it is usually much quieter than that. It arrives as a slow, gradual indifference that is almost invisible while it is happening. It begins the moment your presence stops creating an emotional reaction. In the early stages of any relationship, your attention carries immense weight because it isn't assumed. When you pull back, it is felt. When you lean in, it changes the entire atmosphere. You matter because you are not yet a guaranteed part of her environment. But over time, that dynamic shifts, not because you did something wrong, but because you became too predictable. Your availability became consistent, and your effort became a baseline expectation. Once something feels guaranteed, the brain's survival mechanism stops monitoring it closely. You became a reliable utility, like the air she breathes or the floor she walks on. From your perspective, you were being a stable and good partner, but without clear standards and boundaries, you accidentally taught her that access to you requires zero effort. When access is effortless, the perceived risk of losing you vanishes, and once the risk is gone, the emotional charge of the relationship evaporates. This is why the replies start coming slower and the check-ins become less frequent. She isn't being malicious. Her nervous system has simply stopped responding to a signal that is always there. The most brutal part of this process for men is the immediate aftermath of a breakup. You expect her to feel the loss the moment the door closes, but instead she appears calm, distant, or even lighter. This creates a deep sense of doubt in your own value. But you have to understand the female emotional timeline. For many women, the breakup is not the beginning of the loss, it is the conclusion of it. Long before she said the words, she had been doing the internal emotional work for weeks or even months. She has already grieved the relationship while she was still in it. By the time the actual separation happens, she has already processed the disappointment and weighed her options. The breakup isn't a shock to her, it's the release of a long-held tension. While you are just starting your journey of grief, she has already moved through the most demanding phase. There is also the psychological barrier of optional access. Right after the split, she still believes that if she really wanted to, she could reach out and you would be there. This belief keeps her emotional system from registering a true loss. Regret requires finality, and as long as she thinks a door is still slightly open, the signal of regret will never arrive. This is exactly where men unintentionally sabotage their own value. Chasing, checking in, and sending emotional messages are all actions that confirm your continued access. From your side, it feels like you're trying to repair something, but psychologically, you are just telling her nervous system that there is no real distance yet. And without distance, there is no contrast. Without contrast, she has nothing to compare her new life against. Regret doesn't form because someone suddenly realizes you were a nice guy. It forms when reality diverges from her expectations, when life without you doesn't feel as liberating or as easy as she imagined it would be. As long as you remain emotionally present and reachable, that internal reckoning never happens. This is why the man who tries the hardest to show how much he's improved usually gets the coldest response. His effort increases his predictability, making him more accessible and less impactful. True value is felt in the absence of a signal, not in the noise of a desperate plea. Male regret and female regret operate on completely different clocks. For a man, regret usually arrives like a tidal wave immediately after the loss because his routine has collapsed and the reality is undeniable. He begins to replay every missed opportunity to lead or set boundaries. But for her, regret, if it comes at all, arrives only after a period of evaluation. She has to live through the silence. She has to experience the reality of a world where your support, your strength, and your attention are truly gone. Only then, when the optional access fades and the silence settles, can her mind begin to compare the past with the present. It's a brutal mismatch of timing. One person is waking up to the absence, while the other has already stabilized. This isn't a judgment on who cared more. It's simply a difference in emotional sequencing. Understanding this removes the false story that you were insignificant. The timeline was never about your worth. It was about the mechanics of how the human heart processes a goodbye. It is also vital to understand that regret and reconciliation are not the same thing. A woman can deeply regret misjudging you and still decide never to return. This is often due to identity protection. Coming back requires her to admit that her intuition or her decision to leave was wrong, which can be a heavy blow to her ego and social standing. There is also the fear of being wrong twice, the worry that the same old patterns will resurface. In many cases, her regret becomes a quiet correction for her future choices rather than an invitation to revisit the past. Men often stay stuck because they wait for her regret to turn into action, but regret can exist in total silence. If you tie your sense of worth to whether she comes back, you are handing over the keys to your happiness to someone who has already walked away. Sometimes the most accurate outcome of regret isn't a reunion. It's a lesson that helps both of you grow separately. The strongest position you can take after being taken for granted is not one of anger or dominance, but one of calm self-respect. This means moving from outcome-focused thinking to identity-focused thinking. Stop asking, "Will she regret it?" and start asking, "Am I living a life that reflects my true value?" This requires you to look honestly at where you overextended yourself and where you allowed your boundaries to be ignored. You move forward by refusing to wait for closure or validation. Forward motion doesn't require bitterness, it requires a clear direction. Invest your energy into your purpose, your discipline, and the relationships that actually respond to your effort. Building a life that isn't paused while someone else decides how they feel is the ultimate expression of power. Regret is not something you can force or manufacture through pain or explanations. It only forms when reality creates enough distance for the loss to be felt as a permanent change. And even then, that regret is not a scoreboard of your worth. Your value was never defined by her realization. It was always there, even when it was being ignored. Real strength is quiet. It is having standards without making speeches and having direction without hostility. When you stop measuring yourself by her potential regret, you finally realign with your own identity. Men who move from this place of centered power don't chase closure. They create it by walking forward. They don't bargain for recognition. They command it by their presence and their absence. You must decide that you will never allow your presence to be treated as a guarantee again. That is the only path to a life of respect and clarity. If this perspective gave you the clarity you needed instead of the comfort you wanted, then you are in the right place. This channel is dedicated to the men who are ready to understand the deep, often uncomfortable dynamics of human behavior without lying to themselves. If you have ever been the man who was taken for granted, don't use that experience to fuel resentment. Use it to fuel your growth. Share your thoughts in the comments, not to vent, but to reflect on the pattern you are leaving behind. And if you know a man who is currently stuck in the waiting room of someone else's life, share this with him. The most important question is no longer, will she regret it, but will you ever allow your value to be treated as optional again? The answer to that question is where your future begins.